Race relations are at a very strained place in our country. Probably the most strained they've been since the 1960s.
How do we talk about race and diversity in this polarized climate?
This is our attempt.
We spoke with students and lifelong Hazelwood residents.
We talked to local businesses and clergy.
We spoke with victims of the justice system, and we spoke with people who are part of the justice system.
We even sat down and talked amongst ourselves.
We had one simple question that we started with. Are race relations worse or better, and why do you think that way?
Through the following conversations, it is our hope that you will begin to have similar conversations with the people you encounter in your daily life.
And maybe our different experiences can enrich our shared experiences.
All right, so welcome to another segment of the Hazelwood Diversity Dialogue. And today we have with us a group of high school students that are both from Wexford and from the Hazelwood area. And we're going to continue our conversation about what things are like in our country, what race relations are like, just what things are like overall. And this particular group, I think, is called Gen Zs, right? I'm getting that right? I just want to make sure I got that right, because I tend to focus in on millennials, and I'm finding out now that millennials are older than y'all. So, so I want to get that right. But I want to also thank William Bishop, who is one of the teachers out at North Allegheny in Wexford, where all of the students that are with us from Wexford come from and are attending classes. And so we want to thank him for bringing the students down, and just glad to have everybody here to engage in this conversation. Let's start off by just, I'm going to ask all of you to just tell the audience who you are, what school you're in, you know, just anything you want to say about yourself. You can just go ahead and make that happen. So why don't you start us off, Isis?
Okay, I'm Isis. I like music. I'm really into family and stuff. I love family. I love my community and everything. And I like taking long walks. I'm from, I go to Older Dice. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, me?
Go ahead, Bishop.
Oh, I'm William Bishop. I'm a teacher, a social studies teacher at North Allegheny Senior High School, and I've been teaching there 18 years.
I'm Jimmy Reese. I go to Older Dice. I enjoy history a lot, and politics and music, because I sing.
I'm Alonzo, 18 years old, Older Dice, real passionate about music. I plan, or I aspire to be an artist whenever I grow up. Yeah, that's about it so far.
Hello everyone, my name is Kenyon Harper, but you all can call me KJ. I'm 18 years old. I attend North Allegheny Senior High School. I will be attending Norfolk State University, and I'm also originally from Michigan, and I've been living here in PA for 3 years now. So it's been truly a blessing for me to have come down and meet everyone, and I'm really excited to be a part of this.
That's great.
I'm Paolo Bakikio. I go to North Allegheny Senior High School. I play football, and yeah, that's basically it.
Oh, wait now. Now, this is the one that's connected to Big Jim's, right?
Yes.
So, you know, Big Jim's is a big thing around here in Hazelwood.
Yeah.
Big Jim's is huge. So just so everybody knows, we got a little bit of Hazelwood in here too. They say Big Jim's is in Greenfield, but it's not. It's in Hazelwood. It's down the street on the lower side. Greenfield is up the hill. Hazelwood is here. You know, we own Big Jim's. That's, you know, we definitely own Big Jim's. Good food. I've been going there for years. Great place, man.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Rachel Allen. I'm a junior at NA. My family immigrated from South Africa to the U.S. in 2009 when I was 8. We moved to New York, and then California, and then Washington, and then we moved here 5 years ago. It's the longest we've ever stayed in one place in the U.S., so kind of making our home here.
I'm Bella Patterson. I'm a senior at North Allegheny. I really love children and especially cultures and getting to know people. And I think getting to know each other and putting yourself in experiences with people from different backgrounds is like a really important thing in life. And that's why I'm here.
That's great. That's great. Well, it's really exciting to have all of you with us here this morning, and thank you all for agreeing to do this because it's a Saturday morning where everybody could really be chilling and just getting an extra couple Z's.
Right. Yes,
but we're glad that you're here, and we want you to just kind of share your thoughts with us on the subject matters that we have chosen for today, and it's a continuation of our discussion about what things are like here in our country right now. We have so much that's going on. If you look at, all you have to do is look at the news, whether it be on social media or whether it be on any network television, and what you'll see are things that could really, really test your, your emotions, test your thoughts or your perspective of what kind of country this is. And I think it's so important that when we see something, that we give thought to it, that we don't just look at something and just go ahead and just throw our opinion out there. But before you give your opinion on something, that we think on it and just figure out, okay, well, that's happening, but does that really explain what the whole country is like? I think it's a good way of thinking about things because one situation doesn't explain a whole country, and so it's so important for us to take a balanced approach to looking at what's going on in our world and then beginning to develop our perspectives on that as well. The first question I wanted to just kind of put in front of you all has to do with racism in our country. And we've been talking about that here in Hazelwood for several of our podcast episodes. And what I'd like to find out from you all, and you all can just, you can just bounce off of each other. You just go back and forth. But from what you know about racism at your age, at this point in your life, do you feel like, and what you know about racism in the history of this country, do you feel like things have gotten better or do you feel like things have gotten worse? I'd like you to speak to that.
I feel like racism in America I feel like it's gotten worse. I feel like more people are starting to come out. It's starting to feel like how it was back in the 50s, 60s, back in those times. The people who we have in power, our leaders, the people that we looked up to, I feel like, for example, like Donald Trump, he's having people, making them feel more comfortable and making them speak out more, that's all I like to say. And them being more open and say what they want and them having no consequences. So I feel like it's definitely gotten worse, and I feel like it's going to continue to get worse if we don't put a stop to this or have a change.
So let me ask you this, and I want you all to keep thinking about this because I want to hear from all of y'all on this. So when you say that you feel like things have gotten worse because more people are coming out, do you think the fact that people are coming out is worse?
I mean, I think in a way it's bad, but I'd rather have someone tell me that like they don't like me because of who I am, other than them just hiding. Because like, I feel like Donald Trump is giving people a platform to speak, and like now we know that these people still exist. These people have been there the whole time. The racist people have been around, but they just haven't had anywhere to speak on that platform. But now, instead of people just being closeted in how they feel, at least we know that there's still people like that in our country.
Yeah, I agree. I think that like for a while, all the racism kind of, they were more sneaky about it. Maybe like they were trying to in the cuts, but now that like Trump's in office, like they're more open and like more people are like saying, oh shoot, yeah, there's still racism in America. Like this is happening. Because I feel like some people thought like, oh, it's not an issue anymore. But now that more people are like going out and doing things, saying things, people are like, oh, there is still a problem with racism though. This still happens, which is, I don't know if that's a bad or a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I feel as though, like, racism never went away, you know? People were always racist, you know, day to day. And I feel like with my personal experiences, I saw that never go away, you know what I mean? So whenever stuff like that doesn't go away and people come out with it, it's genuinely not a surprise to me. Like it's not like, whoa, wow, I can't believe, like it's like America's still America. Like the racist people are still racist. Like people are passing down these ideals from generation to generation, and it's a cycle that it almost can't be broken.
I agree with you 100%. Yes. But all you say, all everyone said.
Yeah, like the majority of the country for the while when it seemed to like go underground a bit, they could like hide behind that shield like, oh, there aren't so many like obvious acts of racism as before. But when, like, as Mr. Hamrick, one of our teachers says, like, they're coming out of the woodwork, I just like that phrase, then it allows you to, like, see that it's still going on and deal with it directly, and it doesn't allow you to kind of hide behind that shield that, oh, it's not happening anymore.
And I think it has a lot. It's not just like big things. Like you don't need to just be like, another black guy got shot by a police officer. Just like the normal day-to-day things like that you see. And like, the older I'm getting, the more stuff I'm seeing, the more racism I'm seeing around this in general. Like I can't go out to a pizza shop without dealing with it. Like I can't go to a Walmart without dealing with it. It's just everywhere, like everywhere. And it's just more I'm learning, the more I'm like, what the heck? What is up with this? And it's just making me mad. Like, it makes me frustrated because it's like, I want to like my country and support my country, but there's just so much going on that kind of like makes me kind of not like it, I guess you could say.
Yeah, like certain people, like they're kind of allowed in their position, are kind of allowed to see racism as like an individual thing. Like, I'm not racist, so like I don't have to do anything about it. But like the thing you gotta see is that race is kind of like a whole, like an institutional thing. And by not doing anything, then you're kind of just allowing it like to continue, like sustaining it. Even if you're not individually like being racist or being prejudiced or anything, you're still a part of that system. And so like, I guess like white people, like we're allowed to see it as like an individual thing. But like other groups, when they experience it, they kind of see it as a group thing, and that's like something that like we have to get over and see that it's not just about the individual, about being racist, it's about the whole institution, about the whole country, and that even if we don't do anything, it's like being a bystander in like a bullying situation. Like even if we're not doing anything, it doesn't help.
Right. And to add on to what you were saying, I feel like whenever we talk about it, racism, we have to there's people who have to acknowledge that regardless if they're racist or not, they still benefit from a system that was meant to disenfranchise the people that, like this, as far as black people go. And whenever we talk about racism and how we see it coming out, another conversation should be, how do you deal with it? Because lately on the news, not even on the news, as far as the media goes, a lot of media heads have been coming out with remarks, whether it was on Twitter, whether they're here or backstage or whatever, and some of it is swept under the rug, others have paid for it.
I feel like this sounds a little bit radical, but I feel like under democracy, you can't get rid of racism. And that might sound a little bit crazy. You're like, whoa, like what? But like, as long as people have free speech to just say whatever they want, no matter if it's out of spite or it's hateful, or if this perpetuates a system, like you said before, of the oppression of a certain amount of people, it's just not going to change, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like, I don't know, just if there's free speech or there's completely free thinking, there's no way that you can get rid of somebody thinking a certain way, because you can't kill ideas. But I feel like whenever you eliminate giving them that power to try to do something about it in a social setting, I feel like that's one step forward.
I mean, like, no matter which way you look at it, like, the thing you gotta realize is, like, it's a white people problem. It's our problem. Like, that we're in power. So the only way that that's gonna change is if we start to do that. And it's, like, really hard to do that in, like, institutions. So, like, what people gotta realize is it's our problem. Like, it's something we need to change. Like, we need to fix it.
It's interesting what you just said there. There's really, I would agree that it's very difficult to legislate racism, except for from a behavioral standpoint. So, you know, if you're out driving at night, say 4 o'clock in the morning, and there's no police around, and there's no cars out there, and you have a red light, you might go through the red light sometimes because there's nobody around, and you don't think you're going to get caught, you know? But during the day, when people are watching, you're going to respect that red light, you know? Well, but if your heart is different, if your mind is different, you know, you may never go through that red light. You will always obey that red light because you think it's the right thing to do, you know? And so I think this idea that you all are bringing up in terms of folks being taught to be this way and to talk this way and to have these kinds of perspectives, that's absolutely right. Bishop, I want you to jump in anytime you're ready. Okay. I just want to say that from a baby boomer perspective, when I listen to you all say what you're saying, I was listening to you, Isis, when you said what you said and about, you know, just really making you kind of angry when you're realizing all these different things. And my first experience with racism was when I was 7 years old. I was in the South at 7 years old, and I walked with my cousins to a store that said Smith's Store, and it said Smith's Store on the thing. So I thought, because my last name is Smith, man, I'm about to get some freebies, you know? so we went in, but we looked up before we went in, and one said, you know, colored, and the other said white. So we had to go in on the colored side. When we went in on the colored side, we could look over on the white side and see our white counterparts picking out their candy. And we weren't allowed to pick out our candy. We had to say what we wanted. Then the lady came to the counter, and she was white with blue eyes and blonde hair. And she looked at us and she said, I know all of you all. And she started naming us. And she started naming our uncles and aunts and everything. Well, it turns out that this lady was related to us. She was in our family. And she went in the back, because it was a really hot day, and she got all of us fudgsicles. And she gave us all fudgsicles. And then she asked us what we wanted, and we got the bags of candy. We paid for the candy, but she gave us the fudgsicles. And so I'm walking home, and my fudgsicles kind of melting down my hand because I couldn't get out of my mind the fact that I couldn't pick my candy. And that day was the day that I experienced both racism and privilege. But I didn't know it until I was a grown man. It didn't dawn on me that I couldn't think that I just got a free fudsicle, you know? I just got a free fudsicle, but I couldn't pick out my own candy, you know? I'm 7 years old. My brother was 7, 8, 9, 10. He was 10, and my sister was 7. And we all remember it the exact same way. Wow. Like, that's the one thing that we all remember the exact same way. And so when I hear you all say, this is, you know, when I hear you talk about how it makes you upset, I'm wondering, what is it that you're seeing? What I saw, to me, was like, yeah, it was right in your face kind of thing, you know? But it was also covert, and it was real weird. It was kind of weird and freaky the way it was all happening to us, you know, as kids. But to listen to you all's perspectives on this and to think, when you talk about white people being in power, you know, I think when we talk about racism, we have to talk about racism, even though the racism in America has been predominantly between black and white. But we have now in this country, we have all kinds of diversity. And that's been going on since the beginning of America, you know, where you have people coming from all over the world to live in this country. which kind of brings me to the next question that I wanted to ask with respect to how, when we talk about this country and all of the history that goes along with this country, what kind of history did you all learn? Like, let's just choose elementary school, What kind of history did you learn when you were in elementary school or maybe middle school? Because you guys are about to go to college, And so you've had to learn a good deal of history, but before you say met William Bishop or before you, before you got into high school and everything, what kind of history did you learn? American history, so to speak.
What I learned was there was the revolution or whatever, the American Revolution. They got their independence, and then there was the Civil War, and that was the Emancipation Proclamation, and slaves got their freedom, and then the Civil Rights was Martin Luther King, and then everything was supposed to be okay after that. Racism was supposed to be abolished, and it wasn't a thing anymore. That's what I thought when I was younger. Oh, the Civil Rights Movement, that took everything away. That solved all the problems. But, yeah.
And that's the thing about it too. I learned that very young, that when slaves were supposed to be freed people were still being brought back into slavery, being kidnapped.
12 years a slave. That's exactly what happened with him.
It's true.
Yeah, piggybacking off of what Isis and Alonzo said, I grew up in mostly, all the schools I went to were predominantly white, besides one. And most of the history that was taught to me between elementary and middle school was mostly European history. And yes, we did learn about the civil rights, the Civil War, and who won, Emancipation Proclamation and all that. But learning from the European perspective, there's certain history that they don't want to talk about because they are ashamed and they don't want to tell the truth, the absolute truth of what really happened and how we were really treated. And, my family, my parents, they took the time to teach me the true history, the true heroes and the real facts on what we as Black people, we had to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So growing up in predominantly white schools, it's mostly, it's taught from the white perspective. And I was blessed enough to have parents that were able to teach me my history and what truly happened. So that was my experience throughout elementary and middle school.
Yeah, I think I read an article once, one of the AP history exams. It might have been European or world or US or something. But they were told they had to kind of completely rewrite it because it was so obviously biased and censored and taking all the bad stuff out and making it seem better than it actually was. But other than that, so I was in South Africa for first, second, and then I moved here for third. And to be honest, I don't really remember much of elementary school history. I'm sure I learned the same stuff as you guys did, but I just remember, one thing I don't understand is why all the civil rights movement stuff is only taught in high school, why it isn't taught earlier. I was just thinking when you guys were talking, I only really learned about the Greensboro Four and Brown versus Board of Education, all of that stuff in the latest U.S. history course, and I don't understand why that wasn't taught earlier. But then also the thing in the back of my mind when I'm learning all this is comparing it to South Africa and the apartheid, and how you were talking after how it seems after Martin Luther King everything should be okay. So that's kind of the same thing with South Africa because it seems apartheid's so in the past, but honestly, so little has changed in the past 20 years. Not enough has changed in regards to that, and that's something that the country is really still dealing with. Is not enough has changed. It's just there's just too much turmoil there.
I'm gonna be honest. I think I learned more about the civil rights movement in my early stages of education than I did in high school. I think in my American history class this year at least, we had 3 slides about Martin Luther King, and that was it. And I do remember my teachers in elementary school, like, showing us pictures of the civil rights movement, like, a lot. But it was kind of strange in the way that they taught it, because it was like, okay, I'm going to show you this book that we have about the civil rights movement, and I'm going to show you pictures of the water fountains, and that's it. We had to use different water fountains than other people, and like, this water fountain looks worse than this one, but you're not showing us people getting sprayed with water hoses and getting beat senseless. Like, I don't know. It seemed like the way things are taught is very strange, and it's whatever they want to show. And then like back to like the slavery type thing, like, oh, we're taught that the slaves were freed after, and like, oh, there's no slavery anymore. That's honestly, for a while, that's how I thought about it. Like, oh, there was no slavery after slaves were freed. But then I learned, like, I was in high school, like, that's not true at all. Like, there were still slaves.
From a teaching perspective, there's the issue of what is taught, but then there's also the issue of how it's taught. And so one of the things that school systems and teachers have come under a lot of criticism for is the intellectualization of very, very intense and personal experiences like slavery, like Jim Crow, like the things that have happened in our country's history. But when you do it like you show 3 slides, or you show the pictures of the water fountains, or you tell kids that slavery was over and everybody was happy now and we moved on, but you never get into how did people that went through that, what was their experience? How did they feel? What was the actual impact on the human being that was? And I literally hear instruction on slavery from a very intellectual standpoint, but it's not designed to make people feel and actually have emotions that will prompt them, like Rachel said, to do something, to say, wow, man, that was intense. You know, those are the types of experiences in the classroom and the school that will actually bring some change in us, that make us want to, do something different.
Yeah, like for your class, I had to read The Copper Sun, that book about like the journey of a slave from Africa to the United States, and then when she escaped to Florida, which it's a very rare case, but like seeing that it was so different, like when we're taught it's from such an objective standpoint, and it just seems like numbers and all of that, and then when you actually like read the story. And so I think like one way, like English class is like a really good way to do that. If we start choosing like books that like really teach you something and give you something from a different perspective. And I know like sometimes English teachers have trouble with like censorship, like which books they're allowed to do, but like that would be another great way to like teach it properly, would be through English.
I agree.
You know, the Jews have a saying when they talk about the Holocaust, they'll say that 6 million is a statistic, but one life is a tragedy. And so your point is well taken, because until we really get to the place where we see one life as just as valuable as 6 million, you know, but as long as we look at the stats, we could be desensitized to what's happening in our own neighborhood sometimes, in our own schools or in our own churches, all those kinds of things. Isis?
I was just gonna say, you gotta think about like when we do have discussions about like something like individual, actually like about racism or something like that, and we get like emotional connection to it. With me, I don't know if exactly everyone is even ready to get into the details and the specifics of it, because I know when like I have a discussion in class or something, and we get into like the details, and I'm really like talking about it and we're learning all this, and I'm like, oh my God, it's so terrible. I get mad, and then the rest of the day of school, I'm just pissed. Sorry, I'm just really angry. Like I'm just like, I can't believe this. Like, and I remember we went to see, I can't remember, Selma. I walked out that theater like so mad at everybody. Like, I don't know exactly if we're ready and as a society, and like generally speaking, to like really get into the details of things, because like I feel like if I'm pretty passionate, like a nice easygoing person, if I'm getting frustrated and I'm really like I can't stand white people right now. Sometimes I be feeling like that. I can't stand them right now. They get on my, I don't trust them. But if I'm feeling that way, then imagine like anyone else's perspective. If I'm feeling that way and I'm kind of easygoing, like how exactly are we mature enough, and can we even handle learning the truth? Because it's just so many things and it's so crazy. So I don't know.
That's the thing. I feel like, my bad, but that's the thing. I feel like there needs to be a conversation. We're so used to not knowing. We're so used to not talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like as a society, forget whether you're mature or not to handle the information. That's where it all comes to. The truth hurts. It does, but at the end of the day, there needs to be a conversation, because there's a lot of things. Like, imagine so many opportunities, so many doors that open just by a conversation. You learn, because through a conversation, it's balance. You have an understanding of both perspectives, and that's exactly what we need. Because if we don't have that, then where's the change? We have a lot of problems, but nobody's coming up with solutions, or nobody's talking about solutions. So that's the first thing. Talk, communicate. We do need a conversation.
Well, also to build off Alonzo, I feel like there needs to be openness. You know what I mean? Openness to people's thoughts, ideas, emotions. And whenever somebody comes to you and they tell you how they're feeling about a certain thing, that their feelings are just as valid as yours.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like whenever people try to almost wipe away the way that people are feeling, they're just like, they just dismiss it. That's where a real problem really comes into place, because if you don't respect the other person, you're not getting anywhere. You know what I mean? It's just push, 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 and it just doesn't stop. So.
Right, and just piggybacking off of what you said, that we're so used to, we want people to hear our side, but we never sit down and listen to what they have to say. Because if we can't hear what the other person's saying, like, we can hear them talk for days. It can go one in ear and out the other. But if we don't listen to if we don't see the other person's point of view, if we can't sit down and listen and just hear what they have to say, it may not be something that you agree with, but you can respect and educate one another and try to help others see your point of view and their point of view. So I agree with what you just said about us being able to connect with others and think about their feelings and how they're feeling, and sitting down and just really hear what they have to say, and then we give our say, what we think on the subject.
All right, agree to disagree.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna jump in and ask Bella to share a little bit. Bella has taken a very significant interest in other cultures. She's a little quiet, but Bella, what was your experience like in NA? Were you NA all the way?
No, I went to different schools.
Okay, all right. What was your experience learning?
Well, what I remember from elementary school is mostly just like learning about the presidents and thinking like George Washington was like the first leader and like the first leader of America, and then learning about like the colonies, and I thought that was really America. I thought that's what it was really like, and I don't ever remember learning anything about Native Americans and what we did to them, except like I learned myself outside of school, and then this year I learned a little bit in school. But I think it's, whenever I realized that I was never taught that in school, it really disturbed me that we're like in some ways hiding our history, what the truth was, what we really did. And like, I feel like that keeps happening over and over again. Like the way we teach things, we hide the truth of what really happened. And we're trying to make it seem that it wasn't that bad. But if we keep doing that, if we hide like Native American history, what we did to them, how we pushed them out, and if we hide the truth of slavery, then we're never really going to be able to grow and keep those things from happening again. Because if you don't learn from history, like, it repeats itself. So if we don't address it and grow from it and learn from it, then things can happen again that we never really imagined happening again.
And that's another thing I feel like too. It all goes back to the schools. And everything when it comes to learning something, I feel like school is already a fixed curriculum. Like, that's why when I was younger, I appreciated those teachers who they didn't go too far, but they went beyond than what the schools wanted to teach them. I mean, wanted them to teach the kids. Because, like, if you really want to learn about the real history, then you have to do it outside of school. Because they already have a set that they're about to teach to the students. And my experience, well, we're talking about history right now, but like, as far as the real world goes, my experience in middle school was me being falsely accused of a crime. I think I was 12 years old, and I was in my neighborhood. I lived in Point Breeze at the time. And I was in my neighborhood, and I remember being at the end of my street, and there were cops all the way down on the other side of the street, and they were talking to somebody. And a grown man pointed at me and my friend. Cops got in the car, drove down the street, and they had got out the car and told me, stay where I am, put my hands behind my back. I fit the description of a person who was lighting fires in the neighborhood. So they were accusing me of arson. I had a mohawk. I fit the description, they said, but it wasn't me. I said, well, I just got back in the neighborhood, but I didn't have no say-so. And that was really like my first experience. My mom even told me, she was like, once you're in the system, they got you forever. Good thing I didn't do it, because that taught me young that you're a target. It's crazy how you got to walk out of your home every day and worry about if you could return to it, just by being falsely accused, whether you did it or not.
Thank you.
Right.
That was my real experience.
Even if you know you didn't do anything, it's just like scary, kind of, just seeing the police just drive past, because you're just like if my brother did something, like, I look just like my brother, like, same description, 6 foot, black male, dreadlocks, boom, that's me and my 4 other brothers. So if you just, it's really crazy. It's just like and that's where I feel like there's just a cultural difference. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to not act on your biases, I guess. But I feel like we need to teach people to stop wanting to act upon those thoughts and ideas that you have in your subconscious mind.
You guys have kind of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say implicit bias. Yeah.
Yeah. So you all have kind of transitioned the conversation to the next question. Before we get to that next part of this, I want to ask you another question. So when you think about the different ethnic groups that comprise, this country, that are, within this country and that make up this country, whether people be from Ukraine or from Africa or from China or from Japan or from France or wherever they've come from. You think about all the people that make up Americans that are in America today. And then when you think about African Americans, there's one fundamental difference. What do you think that one fundamental difference is?
I'm not sure.
I feel like I want to say it, but I might be off.
I don't know. Yeah.
Pardon?
I'm not sure.
So,
What do you exactly mean by fundamental?
So, maybe I shouldn't say fundamental. Maybe what I should say is there's one basic difference, just one basic difference in all of the other groups and African Americans here in America.
Oh, you got it?
With
Go
res-
ahead, Isabella.
They
Yes.
don't know where they're from. They
Huh?
might not know where they're from.
That's a great point. That's a great point because think about it. Every other ethnic group that is in this country came to this country.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, so African Americans were forced. They
We don't
didn't come
know
here
nothing.
voluntarily.
So,
Actual
so here's the
people
deal.
just know-
African American is a term that had to be created to describe people who were born out of slavery. Okay? African Americans are people that were born out of slavery. So Africans were brought to America. Okay? They were brought into the country where all of the rest of the ethnic groups came somewhere, whether they ran from their country or whether they came, some other kind of way they came, So how does that, in your mind, think about it. Because if you're African American and you sit down at a table with a group of Africans from Ghana or from Ethiopia or from South Africa, just in any of the African countries, what do you have in common with them?
Nothing.
Outside of the color of your skin, what do you have in common?
That's the disconnect.
So when we talk about learning about American history, where, from a more holistic standpoint, what do we really know about African Americans?
Nothing.
And if somebody said, go back to your own country, what would that mean?
Exactly.
Where would,
I don't know.
because I mean, they took us away from our culture, our home, the motherland. And, I remember doing a homework assignment for Mr. Bishop's class in multicultural, and one of the questions was, how was when the U.S. brought slaves different from when in South America, when the Caribbeans, when they were brought to South America? And the difference was the South Americans, they were able to still practice their culture and know where they came from. And the difference from the U.S. was that they completely brainwashed them. They said, you can't practice your culture, you're going to forget where you came from. And I find that, that's the one that stood out to me when I was doing the assignment, that stood out to me the most. And, it made me very upset, just reading and seeing that, how that all happened. And it was very disturbing. Very disturbing.
Yeah.
So keep in mind, culture is something that is created. We could create a culture out of what we're doing here right now. And somebody would name it. Somebody would name this kind of culture.
Podcast culture.
Yeah, whatever. Podcast culture. What is this? Chex Mix culture, whatever. We could name this culture. But think about, when we talk about African American culture, think about that. Think about what that is from an American perspective. What is that? What is the African American culture from an American perspective? Because if you're taken from a country and for generations you're separated from your families, okay, and then for generations, hundreds of years, you're in slavery, and then after that, there's no laws that say that you really have to be treated fairly, and then you're not even looked at as, remember, when people talk about African Americans who are racist people talk about African Americans, they don't always see them as fully human.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a species question. There's a question of species. What species are they? Are they really fully human? And that was a part of the Constitution for many, many years.
Wasn't there a law? It was what, 3/5? I think
Yeah.
3/5. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna, for some of the earlier ones, you could probably like put these back in the interview, but my mom is getting her PhD in cultural geography, and so she's doing about like South African immigrants in the workplace, and she's like interviewed some like Africans, like they were, and asked them like who they feel like more connected to in the United States, and like one surprising thing they said was like there was that kind of disconnect between African American and their culture, and it wasn't like this automatic like we get each other sort of thing. And then was the other thing I wanted to talk about. Oh, I've already forgot. Okay, no.
It's okay. You know, it's interesting though, because when you talk about, just to finish this thought, when you talk about African American culture, remember, African American culture was born out of necessity. So we had to create, we had to create the culture.
Mm-hmm.
So if you know, during the time of Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, they built a lot of housing projects and things. And that's where a lot of African Americans lived, in housing projects. And there were culture that grew out of that, you know? Our whether it was our family reunions, whether it was our just getting together and doing whatever we did, you know? Now, I think we could probably go back and say it goes deeper than that. But your culture sometimes is created out of sometimes the resources that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And then there it is. Question I have for you all now is, what is it like for you all growing up in your